On February 24th, 2012, the family of 18-year-old Samantha Koenig received a text message from her phone. She had been missing for 3 weeks, snatched from the Common Grounds coffee hut in Anchorage, Alaska. The message directed them to a local dog park. Under a flyer for a missing dog, they found a plastic bag containing a Polaroid photo and a note. The note demanded $30,000 for her safe return. In the photo, Samantha is wrapped in a blanket, holding a copy of the Anchorage Daily News. The date on the paper is February 13th, long after she had disappeared. Her eyes are open, looking straight into the lens. To her family, it was a miracle. It was proof of life. But when FBI analysts examined the original photograph in a lab, the image took on a far more disturbing meaning. The newspaper had been carefully positioned to create the illusion that Samantha was holding it herself. Thin strands of fishing line had been used to keep her eyelids open, while makeup was applied to conceal the signs of decomposition. By the time the photo reached her parents, Samantha had already been dead for weeks, and the man behind the camera had staged her body to convince them she was still alive long enough to demand money. The man behind that photograph was Israel Keyes, a former soldier, a contractor, a father, and a serial killer who spent more than a decade moving across the United States almost invisibly. He buried kill kits years in advance, targeted victims in different states, and left behind crime scenes so disconnected that investigators never realized they were hunting the same person. By the time the FBI understood what they were dealing with, they had found a killer who approached murder like a logistics project designed to avoid detection. Israel Keyes was a predator who didn't fit the typical serial killer profile. He didn't have a type. He didn't have a specific territory. He was obsessed with the FBI's own profiling methods, and he used that knowledge to ensure he stayed invisible. He followed a set of rules that made him nearly impossible to track. Rule 1. Never kill close to home. Rule 2. Never target people you know. Rule 3. Always pay in cash and leave your phone behind. Keyes would fly from Anchorage to a city like Chicago or Seattle. He would rent a car and drive 1,000 miles into a completely different state. He looked for people in remote areas, trailheads, parks, and isolated homes. Because he had no connection to the victims and no history in the towns, the local police never had a reason to look at him. But his most chilling innovation was the kill cache. Long before he planned to commit a crime, Keyes would travel to a remote location. He would scout the area, ensuring it was far from security cameras and heavy traffic. Then, he would bury a 5-gallon Home Depot bucket. Inside these buckets was everything he needed for a murder. They contained handguns, silencers, ammunition, zip ties, and Drano or lye to accelerate the decomposition of a body. He even buried large sums of cash, stolen from banks, to fund his future trips. He told investigators he had buried these kits all over the country. One was found in Eagle Creek, Alaska. Another in upstate New York. Some are likely still buried in the woods of Washington, Texas, and Wyoming, waiting for a man who will never return. By burying his tools years in advance, Keyes removed the risk of being caught with a weapon during a routine traffic stop. He treated murder like a construction project. You gather the materials, you prep the site, you execute the plan, and you clean up. For over a decade, the system worked, but in early 2012, Keyes became overconfident. He broke his primary rule. He stayed close to home. On the night of February 1st, Samantha Koenig was closing up the coffee hut. The security footage shows a man in a mask approaching the window. He points a gun at her, climbs through the window, and turns off the lights. The abduction was silent and efficient. He led her to his truck, which he had parked across the street at a local gymnasium. Keyes took Samantha to his house. His girlfriend and daughter were away for the night. He kept her in a shed on the property, where he sexually assaulted and murdered her. Afterward, he went on a pre-planned family cruise to the Gulf of Mexico, leaving Samantha's body in the shed. When he returned, he realized he needed money. He took Samantha's debit card and began a cross-country trip. He thought he was being clever by wearing disguises and withdrawing small amounts, but he underestimated the digital trail he was leaving. The FBI was tracking that card in real time. Every withdrawal gave them a location. They saw the suspect moving through New Mexico, then Arizona. They knew he was driving east. On March 13, 2012, a Texas Ranger spotted a white Ford Focus in a hotel parking lot in Lufkin, Texas. The car matched the description of a vehicle seen near an ATM withdrawal. When the Ranger pulled the car over, he found Israel Keyes. In the car, they found Samantha's phone, her debit card, and the same mask worn during the abduction. The man who had spent years being a ghost was finally caught because he wanted $30,000 he didn't even need. When the FBI brought Keyes back to Anchorage, they thought they were dealing with a local killer who had made a mistake. They quickly realized they were dealing with something much larger. Keyes wasn't afraid of the investigators. He was bored by them. He sat in the interrogation room, leaning back, often smiling. He treated the interviews like a business negotiation. He would offer a tiny detail about a past crime in exchange for a specific brand of cigars or a Snickers bar. He told the agents, "There's no one who knows me or who has ever known me, who knows anything about me really." He began to describe his past. He talked about his time in the U.S. Army, where he served at Fort Lewis and in Egypt. He admitted that he had been two different people for a long time. In one life, he was a hard-working contractor who attended parent-teacher conferences. In the other, he was a man who spent his free time scouting trailheads for people to kill. He told them about a trip to Vermont in June 2011. He had flown into Chicago, rented a car, and driven nearly 1,000 miles to the town of Essex. He didn't know anyone in Vermont. He simply picked a house that looked right. The victims were Bill and Lorraine Currier. They were a middle-aged couple with no enemies. Keyes broke into their home, tied them up, and drove them to an abandoned farmhouse he had found earlier. He told the FBI he killed Bill first, then Lorraine. He left their bodies in the basement of the house and drove away. By the time he confessed this, the farmhouse had been demolished. The debris, along with the remains of the Curriers, had been hauled to a massive landfill. Despite a search that lasted weeks, their bodies were never recovered. The earth had already closed over his work. The more Keyes talked, the more the FBI realized how wide his net really was. Keyes would rob banks to finance his murder tours. He would drive for days to a small town, hit a bank, and then drive hundreds of miles away to bury the cash in a kill cache. He admitted to a robbery in Tupper Lake, New York, where he made off with thousands of dollars. In one instance, he set a house on fire in a small Texas town. He didn't know the people who lived there. He just wanted to create a distraction. While the local fire department and police were occupied with the blaze, Keyes went to the other side of town and robbed a bank. To a profiler, these look like the actions of different types of criminals. Serial killers usually have a specific psychological drive. Bank robbers have a financial drive. Arsonists have an emotional drive. Keyes had none of those. He was a general contractor who looked at the world as a set of problems to be solved. If he needed money for a trip to find a victim, he robbed a bank. If he needed the police to be elsewhere, he started a fire. He once spent hours staking out a trailhead in Eagle River, Alaska. He had a bucket of Drano and a shovel ready. He told investigators he sat in the brush, watching people walk by, waiting for the right moment. He didn't care who the victim was. He was just waiting for the materials to arrive. The level of detachment was what disturbed the FBI the most. He spoke about his victims like they were items on a checklist. He mentioned a girl he abducted in Oregon in the late 90s. He mentioned a couple in Washington he killed and dumped in a deep lake, using boat anchors to weigh them down. But he refused to give names. He wanted to keep the power. By late 2012, the negotiations between Keyes and the FBI were breaking down. He was frustrated that the media was starting to cover his story. He didn't want to be a celebrity killer like Ted Bundy. He hated the idea of his daughter finding out the details of what he had done. On December 2nd, 2012, while being held under high security in the Anchorage Correctional Complex, Israel Keyes took back the only thing he had left: the ending. Keyes had managed to conceal a small piece of a razor blade. He used it to cut his left wrist and then used a length of bedsheet to strangle himself. When guards found him the next morning, he was dead. Beneath his body, they found several pages of a yellow legal pad. They were soaked in blood and initially unreadable. The FBI laboratory spent weeks restoring the text, hoping for a list of names or a map to the remaining kill caches. What they found was a dark, rambling poem. It was a suicide note that offered no closure and no answers. He wrote about the land of the free and his contempt for the society he lived in. He didn't name a single victim. He took his secrets with him,